Howdy, howdy. Recently, I went to Woodland War Machine's RootCon where they had an in-person tournament. And being the stats degenerate that I am, I asked everybody to record their games, and lucky for me, they did. So I'm here today with some stats. If you want to see more charts and graphs, check out the link below that takes you to makecraftgame.com. And while you're there, make sure to hit that subscribe button. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was the changes that they did to the tournament. The first thing was maps were preset. This was not chosen by people. I think this was more of a physical limitation. So they just had maps sitting out at each table already pre-assigned. So I'm not really going to talk too much about maps because theoretically they should have been split even. They weren't, but we're going to just pretend they were. The deck that they used was Exiles and Partisans, which makes sense. That's pretty similar to the Root Winter Tournament. The first player was chosen randomly. They had us roll dice. I would have also just used Twazi. And then we just went clockwise around the table for turn order. It was just easy. And honestly, where you sat was pretty random because, at least for the games I played, I was playing with people who were either strangers or people who I only knew through the internet. So I did not recognize them in person automatically per se. They did use two different landmarks. They used the ferry for the lake map, which makes sense. And then they used the tower on the mountain map, which I found really interesting because it adds so many points to a game. So I do wonder how that kind of skewed games where mountain map has two extra points of extra sources of resources, being the tower and the paths. And then last, and this is the most interesting change to me, is they only used one Vagabond in the draft. So no second Vagabond, no chance of the Vagabond being excessively in the draft because of having two cards there. For gameplay, this was very similar to the Winter Tournament, where the Vagabond used his Despot Infamy, coalitions were not allowed, and then the Corvid Conspiracy began the game with 12 plots through each type instead of their normal 2. So to talk a little bit about the tournament rounds, there were 5 rounds in the tournament. There was round 1, where the winners of round 1 immediately went to the semifinals. The losers of round 1 went on to the Cool Kids round, which was round 2. The winners of round 2 then went on to round 3, which was titled Cool Kid Losers, which wasn't confusing during the time of the tournament, but saying it out loud kind of sounds a bit confusing. The winners of round 3 then joined the winners of round 1 in the semifinals, and then finally, we went on to the finals. All in all, there was 49 games. There ended up being 2 3-player games, 33 4-player games, and 14 5-player games. And now that I went over how the tournament worked, let's get into the thing I'm really excited to show you, which is the factions and how well they performed. Now, they're listed from worst to first, with number 10 being the worst and number 1 being first. These are ordered by win rate, and I calculated win rate as the number of games they won divided by the number of games they played. So it only really matters if they were chosen from the draft. So number 10 is the Lord of the Hundreds. Poor little rats stuck at the bottom. Now, they were in the draft 22 times. And out of those 22 times, they were played 21, which means they only went unchosen once. So they were a fairly popular faction when they showed up, being picked 95% of the time. However, they got 2 wins, which means 19 losses. And that gives us a pretty, well, kind of sad win rate of only 10%. So winning only 10% of the time landed them pretty far back. This is a little bit of an underperformance for the Lord of the Hundreds. I kind of expected them to do a little bit better. So, but what's number 9? Riverfolk Company. So this one doesn't really surprise me. I feel like the Riverfolk Company have been kind of struggling in tournaments as of late. They also showed up in the draft 22 times, and they were chosen 17 out of those 22 times, so a total of 77%. Not as popular. But they had also 2 wins. But because they were chosen less, They only had 15 losses, which gives them a win rate of 12%. So we're moving up just a little bit. Now we have number 8 as the Vagabond. This little guy showed up 31 times in the draft. Now, this I found actually hilarious because despite not having the second faction card, they still showed up the most in the draft. And they had the potential of showing up the same as any other white faction. So Lizard Cult, Corvids, Woodland Alliance. There's more. Is there more? Yeah, there's more. Riverfolk Company, I think that's it. But still, they showed up the most, which I found hilarious. And because they showed up the most, and they were only chosen 19 times, it means they also were the most unchosen faction of the tournament. Those 12 times were the most any one faction has been unchosen. So, leading to that, we had 3 wins and 16 losses, which gives us a win rate of 16%. So, again, climbing that ladder up. Now, if in like the ideal world, if every game was 4 or 5 player, average faction average win rate would be between like 20 and 25%, 20 for 5 player and 25 for 4 player. So right now these factions are performing below average. And now we have number 6, Marquise de Cat. And you might be wondering, where did number 7 go? That is because 2 factions tied for number 6. The only reason the Marquise de Cat is shown first is because I typically like to rank ties in terms of release date. It seemed like an easy way to get the ties to choose which ones, besides just going with my favorite. And as many people might know, Marquise de Cat is not my favorite, although it's a pretty cute cat. All right, so looking at the draft, we showed up a total of 24 times, and we were chosen 18 times, or 75% of the time, which means we went unchosen 6. Out of those, we had 3 wins and 15 losses. So that puts us at a win rate of 17%. Now, the Marquise de Cat is actually tied for the 3rd most unchosen faction of the tournament. So, not as popular as some of the other factions. And who else is tied for 6th would be the Corvid Conspiracy. That looks kind of difficult to read. I hope you can see it. It's a crow. All right. So the crows showed up in the draft 27 times, about 55% of the time. They were chosen 24 times, so 78%, leaving unchosen of 3. They were tied for the 2nd most picked faction of the tournament. No, they weren't tied. They were the 2nd most picked faction of the tournament. They were tied for the 3rd faction to most likely to show up. So they liked being here. Crows are a popular one. But despite that popularity, they won only 4 games, with leaving 20 losses and giving us a win rate of 17%, still performing below average. So, number 5, the Underground Duchy. Now, this one actually surprised me a little bit because the Underground Duchy typically does really well. I typically see the Underground Duchy and the Woodland Alliance being in like the top 2 spots for the winter tournaments for win rate perspectives. So, seeing them at number 5 kind of caught me off guard. So, they showed up in the draft 24 times, which is a little low. But they were picked 22 times at a 92%. Pick rate, and then they went unchosen 2 times. So with that, they only won 4 games, which gives them a loss of 18, and that gives them a win rate of 18%. This is extremely low. I'm not sure if this is an in-person thing, if this is just a everyone at this convention hated moles thing. I could see it going either way. And so we go on to number 4, the Woodland Alliance. All right, so the Woodland Alliance was the 3rd most picked faction in the tournament. They showed up in the draft 25 times, They were chosen 23 times, which gives them a 92% chosen rate. And they went unchosen 2 times. So they had a win of 6%. They had 6 wins. What am I talking about? Percentages. I get excited about percentages, guys. And then they had a loss of 17, which gives us a win rate of 26, which is about average, but still low to what I was expecting. I think in the winter tournament, they had a win rate of about 30-something%. So they typically are above average, not at average. And to see them in 4th was really surprising. But I'm never going to say no to the Woodland Alliance being knocked down off their throne. And so that leaves us going on to the 3rd faction, my favorite, the Lizard Cult. So the Lizzies got up to the top 3 for win rate for this tournament, guys, and I am so excited. I cannot be more proud of my Lizard boys. I did lose to the Lizards 1 game, and congrats to Opie for beating me. I 100% am happy losing to Lizards any day of the week. So the Lizard Cult showed up in the draft 26 times, and they were only chosen 16, leaving them with 10 times unchosen. They were the 2nd most unpicked faction behind the Vagabond. So even though they did really well, it's because they didn't play very many games, and then the ones they did play, they won. So out of those 16, they won 5 times, not 7. Which means we had a loss of 11 and gives us a win rate of 31%. This is very high for the Lizards. Kind of seems like an abnormality, but hey, I'll take it because I'm never gonna say no to my Lizzies. All right, and that takes us to number 2, the Keepers in Iron. Now, the Keepers did really well this tournament. They showed up in the draft 27 times. And that ties them with the 3rd most faction to show up in the 3rd faction to show up the most in the draft. They were picked only 21 times and unchosen 6 times. And so they actually were the 3rd most unpicked faction. So again, were not played as much, but did really well in the games that they were played because they had 7 wins, which gives us 14 losses and a win rate of 33%. So that's not that much different than the Lizards. Again, above average, but, you know, we're just kind of creeping up. And so that leaves our number 1 pick, the Erie Dynasty. Are we surprised? No. Did I want to be surprised? Maybe. So the Erie Dynasty showed up in the gate draft a total of 27 times, and they were played 26 times, so 96%. They only went unchosen once. They were the number 1 picked faction, and they were the 2nd, they ranked 2nd in factions showing up the most in the draft. And even with that high pick rate, they still won 13 games, which is kind of insane because they won almost as much as they lost. This is the highest win rate I've ever seen in a single tournament of 48%. After 49 games, that's pretty extreme and pretty crazy. But here we are. The Erie Dynasty did the absolute best and kind of swept the competition. So if you're interested in seeing the final game, I believe that they're going to be posting that on the Good Time Society YouTube page. I'm not sure when that's going up, but keep an eye out for that because that was a really fantastic game to watch. And we had to watch it without hearing any of the finalists' commentation or, you know, comments or anything. And I'm really excited to watch it again, hearing their thought processes, because apparently for those who were in the room, they like explained why they were doing things and like talked out a lot of their moves, which I find really, really cool. So that's the stats. Again, check out makecraftgame.com in the link below if you want to see more graphs and charts, and I'll catch you next time.